College applications are a ton of work. We write essays, we write our personal statement, we prepare for interviews just to get a short email that could very well change the course of our lives. What's even worse about this is the fact that we don't know why we may get rejected or waitlisted. So today I'm going to go through 7 common application mistakes that kill Ivy League applications. Hi, I'm Michael. I'm a student at Brown University, and if you want any personalized admissions advice or have any questions to ask me directly, feel free to reach out to me at Minnect in the description below. Mistake number 1, not closely rereading and reviewing our supplemental and personal statement essays. In general, I have a 3-step method that I learned from Cal Newport's book, How to Be a Straight A Student, that has honestly never failed me in terms of being effective and efficient in reviewing essays for any mistakes. It's a 3-pass method, so whenever we write any response to any sort of application question or have any sort of written response in general in school or in some sort of essay or in some short response, this is what I would do if I have no time crunch to be under. Firstly, I read through my entire answer to that statement on the computer if I'm typing it, and I just look for the argument and the flow of it. So I make sure that it makes sense, that the logic of the argument makes sense, and that there's no weird jumps in the paragraphs that would make the reader confused. After doing this, I then go through the more detailed pass in which I print out whatever I wrote, and then I go and read it out loud in my room as if I'm giving a speech. When I do this, I'm able to very well catch any grammatical mistakes. So if I'm reading, for example, an odd phrase, it would be very easy to catch this because I'm physically reading this on a piece of paper and I have a pen to mark down any mistakes that I think are odd. After I mark down these mistakes and I read the entire speech out loud, I then correct these mistakes back on my computer. And in general, when I'm doing this, if I have any mistake I catch, I just go back to the top of the paragraph to reread this paragraph in the speech format, and then continue, of course, to the end of the essay. The 3rd pass is my favorite, and it's just called the sanity pass. So that can be done when you're just about to submit something, and when I'm looking through my application, I just reread the entire text that I pasted into the application to make sure there's no changes in formatting that might have been weird, because a lot of applications use a plain text format. And I also just make sure that there's no random grammatical changes. In fact, I think I recently caught one very minor mistake in one of my essays because of this, and just reading the rest of the essay really helps me maintain sanity in terms of understanding that yes, I wrote something very well written and that I submitted something with the full effort that it deserved. Doing this will catch 99% of any of the mistakes we make in our essays, and in general, it's a great way to review any essay, whether it be for any sort of English, history, political science class. Anything that we write and submit should go through this 3-pass system, and it can take a much longer time with much longer essays, but for these shorter essays and our personal statement for the Common App, it shouldn't take very long at all. The 2nd common mistake that kills Ivy League applications is not submitting test scores. And I know that a lot of schools have become test optional and have stayed test optional because of the pandemic. But I'm going to read a statement from Dartmouth's page regarding the test scores and their policy when reviewing them. Their press release states, "The absence of such scores underscores long-standing misperceptions about what represents a high or a low score. Those definitions are not binary, a score that falls below our class mean, but several hundred points above the mean at the student's school is high, and as such it has value as one factor among many in our holistic assessment." So in general, according to this statement, unless your score is very, very low and would be very much below your high school's average test score, it still makes sense to submit the test score if you studied very hard for this exam and you likely did very well amongst your peers in your local area. If you're at an institution that is more underprivileged in terms of resources, they take that into account in their holistic assessment, at least Dartmouth does, and they will be able to understand, for example, that this student is ranking very highly among their academic status among their class. So even if, for example, you got like a high 1400 score, but most of the kids in your school get around a mid 1400 score, it's not really necessary to drop that score because you want to apply to some school like Stanford, which has a very, very high average SAT score, if you're doing much well than all the other kids in your area. Again, depending on your area and your school, it's a very personalized discussion and something that should be taken heavily into consideration. But again, this is a very specific case that a lot of students tend to forget. You're not competing against the entire nation, but mostly just your region when you're trying to get into these schools. The 3rd common mistake that kills Ivy League applications is an inappropriate social media. In general, I feel like a lot of students have Instagram pages that aren't private or post very inappropriate content. Anything that you wouldn't want your employer to see in the future should not be something on your Instagram that is at least public. So one quick fix to this is to just make our Instagrams private. But again, if we want to just take a full look at our Instagrams, our Facebooks, our Snapchats, any of our public social media profiles, and then delete anything that would make us look bad in a professional sense, that would be my advice as to what to do in general. And as a bonus tip, if we really want to impress our college admissions officers, we can make a professional LinkedIn page that would help to come up in our Google search. So if they were to search you in any sort of argument regarding whether or not they should accept you, and they see, for example, that you've dedicated yourself to making a very nice LinkedIn page that doesn't take much effort to make at all, it's one plus for us, for those of us who make a LinkedIn page, and it can help hide, for example, other social media pages. So if they saw that you have this very professional LinkedIn and they saw that they had this neutral Instagram, which is private, then that could just be a plus in our favor instead of just having a neutral Instagram that doesn't really do anything to harm us but puts us in a neutral stance. Now, the fourth common Ivy League application mistake, which I am so guilty of in general, is not actually answering the question that's asked of us. So I know specifically that we have very specific questions that schools tend to repeat. For example, why this school? But when I was writing an essay, for example, for one of the schools that I was applying to, I had this situation where one school asked why this school in a very general sense, but another school asked how will this school achieve your professional goals? Or specifically, why do you want to go to this school and how do you think it will help you achieve your professional goals? So that second part of the question is very, very important to answer, specifically asking about professional goals. But for me, I initially tried to answer this question in the same way I answered the general why school essay. The fact that I just tried to take that in one direction made me rethink my entire essay because I was re-looking at the question and I was seeing that my essay really didn't answer that second part. So I really had to reframe my introduction, my conclusion, and the ends of all of my body paragraphs to make sure that that professional goal part of the question was sufficiently answered. Because then again, it's very easy to reuse essays or reuse the structure of our essays when writing different supplemental essays, but it could lead into these very easy rabbit holes of us answering questions that are not really asked of us. So in any interview, in any application essay, please be sure to answer the actual question that's being asked, because if we don't, it seems like we're avoiding the question and that's just points marked off against us. The fifth common mistake is using negative words or words with a negative connotation. This is a very niche area to improve upon, but if we are reading our essays and there's so much negativity put, for example, in our personal statement regarding different controversial topics or words with just negative connotations in general, it can very much reflect not only on our essay, but on our application as well, because it's very easy to associate the negative words that we write with the person who's writing them and the person's opinion of us when they're reading this essay. So if I were to discuss something in any of my essays, I would try to frame it in a positive light, or not frame it in a negative light at least, and make it neutral. So replacing any words with a negative connotation could make a big psychological difference as to how the admissions officer who's reading all of these essays sees us and sees our application in general. It's a very much connected effect, like a sort of halo effect in terms of the words that we write. If we were to write very positive words with a very positive connotation, that could very well reflect positively upon our application. But psychologically, if they read very negative words, it just isn't going to likely result in a good application view after reading all these words with negative essays. We want to spread positivity within our essays and make sure that our admissions officers look at our application in a positive light and not do anything to tarnish that reputation on our application. The sixth major mistake that kill Ivy League applications are inflating our activities section. I know that it's so easy to think that we should put as many hours as possible on our activities statement. It's always a big allure, especially when we're trying to make our application look much grander than it could be. But if applications officers have a very good application with very good activities, and they see that we, for example, inflated or exaggerated the amount of hours we put into any one of our activities, it may put our entire application into question, and that could very well be the deciding factor as to whether or not we get into a school or not. So in my opinion, it's always best to actually calculate the hours we spend doing these activities and to put a number that we calculated in our application. If we do that, it is very much more likely that the admissions officers will take our numbers seriously, and they're not going to question our ability to tell the truth, not only in our activities section, but also the rest of our application. And finally, number 7, and perhaps the most annoying application mistake, is trying to sound too intellectual. And this is so common among the people applying to these Ivy League schools because I feel like we believe that we need to sound smarter than we actually are. We will put these very advanced scientific terms regarding the stuff that we're researching, or very advanced medical terms, when in reality, a lot of the admissions officers aren't necessarily going to have a huge background in these random niche topics in science. So trying to state all these random words is honestly going to confuse the people reading our essays, and it's also just going to make us sound like we're trying too hard. It's important to take the stuff that we're trying to say and put it in a more approachable light. If we're trying to explain our very advanced scientific research project, then it's important to be able to frame it in a way that laymen or people who don't study science can understand this topic. And in general, we should not try to sound too intellectual by just pasting our abstract or the first sentence of our abstract into our application and expect people to just understand it immediately. Because the stuff that we've been working on for so many months and years is stuff that they're just reading about for the first time. So in general, in life, I think it's important to not try to sound too smart, depending on the audience you're talking to, of course. But in general, especially on our applications, please do not put random high vocab SAT or ACT words or random vocabulary words from medicine to try to make ourselves sound smarter. It just won't have the effect that we think it does. In fact, it's going to have a negative effect, most likely. On the other hand, it's important to not just have some random elementary school vocabulary in our essays. I feel like we need to make sure that we put some professional sounding vocabulary in there. But again, we know the difference between some word we've never heard of before and we just looked it up because it's a synonym of some basic word we used, versus just putting a word that feels right in that sentence, even if it's a little more high vocabulary. There's nothing wrong with doing the latter. And those are the 7 common application mistakes that kill Ivy League applications. Thank you guys so much for watching my video. Again, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask me, please feel free to connect with me on Minnect, link in the description. And please be sure to like and subscribe, and comment which of these application tips you found to be the most useful. Be sure to watch this video that is recommended just for you, and I'll see you guys in the next video.